and welcome back to the TP&I podcast, and an even bigger welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. This is interview number 4 in our series of interviews that I am calling Challenging Poverty Interviews. For those who haven't seen the first 3, be sure to head over to the channel and check those out after this, and of course subscribe if you enjoy. Today we have Michael with us here today, who is the area manager for the North and East Scotland for established charity the Trussell Trust. So to start here, for those who maybe aren't really aware of the Trussell Trust, could you maybe give us a quick intro and more specifically what your role is within the organisation?
Sure. The Trussell Trust is a UK-wide organisation that supports a network of food banks, providing emergency food to people experiencing a financial hardship or crisis. More recently, though, we have taken the approach that we don't want to be a permanent feature in the UK society. It's not right that anyone, particularly in the 6th richest nation in the world, it's not right that anyone should have to rely on charity. They shouldn't have to rely on a food bank to put food on their table, to feed themselves or to feed their family. So our vision is for a future without the need for food banks, and we're committed to working towards that future. We recognise we're some way from that just now. So in the meantime, we are committed to supporting food banks in our network, continue to provide emergency food as long as is needed. But more recently, we're working collectively as a network, but with individual food banks as well, to think about what other areas could they get involved with, both locally, so nationally as well, to begin to support challenging the underlying reasons why people are coming to food banks. So lots of different reasons why people come to food banks, the primary one being lack of income. But it's thinking about how can they work more collaboratively in their local communities to ensure that people are accessing support at the right time, to help them maximise their income or minimise their expenditure, hopefully to the extent that they don't ever need to have to come to a food bank. My role as an area manager is to support food banks within the North and East of Scotland, so supporting them with their general operations, but also thinking a bit strategically as well about what could this look like in terms of the work they're undertaking to support people in poverty, whether that's increasing access to advice or increasing access to mental health support, whether that's working with their local authority to think about access to emergency financial grants or other types of support they might be eligible to. It also involves influencing campaigning work on things that need to change at a more structural level as well. Area managers also support with the governance of the organisation, so all the boring but essential compliance work that charities all need to adhere to, because ultimately charities are steward of funds that are donated to them, and there's a responsibility that they use those resources appropriately. So a lot of my role is about supporting the governance of these organisations as well. So very, very wide-ranging role, yeah, the area manager, but one I enjoy, and I really enjoy the close connections you have with the individual food banks, yeah, their staff teams, their volunteer teams, and just listening to how embedded in their communities they actually are. Yeah.
Well, I'm of course already aware of the Trussell Trust, and I do admire that the work that they do. I think they do a great job of showing compassion towards people in food poverty, and I think it gives them hope that they can be treated with dignity, especially with things like the cash first approach coming into play, which we'll get into a bit later on in the video. But for now, I think we'll move into our public submissions section of the video. So I've got my notes here just because I want to make sure that the questions are being asked in the way that they want. Okay, so just going to jump right in here. One issue that has come up from our lived experience as members living out in rural villages, more specifically, is that they find even when traveling to their nearest town to access their local shop, the shop itself has a very limited range of healthy foods compared to that of a regular supermarket. How might you suggest we support those living in these rural villages to access a better and more healthy range of foods?
Excellent question, which is coming up more and more often, and it's really exposing the issue of the rural poverty premium, which is a double-barreled situation. You've obviously got the poverty premium, in which it bizarrely costs you more money to live in poverty than it does not to, but then also the rural premium as well, where it, like the submission has already intimated, it costs more money to live in a rural area. I think the first thing I would say in response to that is that this is why we really need to be focusing on raising people's incomes as a starting point, wherever they're based. I think it really needs to highlight the work that we need to do to campaign about how we need to be increasing people in rural areas' incomes even more in terms of bringing them up to a comparable level. I mean, we see in London, and rightfully so in London, there's a different package of support. There's different wage levels for people living in London because it's a higher cost of living in London, and that's absolutely fair. Can we have this debate about rural communities, you know, in Aberdeenshire? I mean, I had this conversation with the food bank manager in Cooper, who covers the northeast of Fife, which is a very rural area as well. And he comments that their job centre in Cooper is based right next door to their food bank. So someone that is maybe accessing universal credit, for example, who is based in Cooper, you know, let's say they get their £85 standard allowance per week. They get the £85, but maybe someone based in Strathmiglo, which is a village, you know, about 10 miles away from Cooper, they have to get to Cooper in order to get access to that. But in order to get there, they have to pay for a day ticket to get the stagecoach bus there and back. Costs about £9, I think it is in Fife. Yeah, so already they're £9 out of pocket. They don't get that. They don't get that returned back to them. So I think there is very much a cause for that debate to be had about emphasising how it costs more money to live in rural areas, transport being the biggest barrier we hear time and time again. And we really need to be focusing on ensuring people have the income to be able to afford to travel, whether it's to get food, whether it's to access healthcare, whether it's to access employment as well. Rural factors should be considered when we're talking about minimum levels of income people need to be able to live fulfilling lives. So that would be the first thing I would say. I think the second thing I would say is that there's quite interesting models been explored in some parts of the UK where they're really looking at the cooperative models of food in local communities. So it's the idea that food, you know, communities come together as a sort of cooperative, and they have an ability to bulk produce goods from certain suppliers, and because of that bulk procurement that they're doing, it gives them more bargaining power to get prices at a more competitive rate. So it's bringing in food into a community at a more competitive price, but importantly, it's not provided at a charitable rate, or it's not provided at a discounted rate. It's provided at a flat rate throughout the community that everyone can access. I think that's really important because, again, when we're campaigning for a future without the need for food banks, we really want to try and guard against two-tier food systems. So your food systems that the people with haves can access, and then discounted food ranges as well for people who are maybe on lower incomes. Yeah. What we want to do is raise the bar so that we're not having to rely on a second-tier system, but that we're actually enabling people to have enough money to afford food as everyone else in society should be able to. Nothing, and you know, food banks and other charities have done an amazing job, like you've already said, of providing a compassionate, dignified service, but fundamentally nothing can replace the dignity of having enough money to be able to afford to buy your own food. So looking at increasing incomes, clearly the first thing we need to be looking at, but looking at other food systems more generally as well, and how communities can maybe look to bring in more competitive and healthier, nutritious food into their community, looking at local suppliers as well, and not overly relying on big supermarket chains.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just a little bit of a side note, but I think it is worth mentioning here that for those that have access to Wi-Fi, there is, of course, ways to access supermarkets and healthier ranges of food that way. And I myself am a digital champion, so if there's anyone that has Wi-Fi but would like some maybe online tutoring on how to use that, just I'll leave my email in the description. You can give us a shout and we can see what we can do for you.
Great, Martha. Thank you so much.
Yeah, moving on to our next public submission. There is a harsh cutoff when it comes to free school meals assistance. One lived experience member found that if they earn as little as £1 over their current regular income, this help is seen as not needed anymore, and then it's immediately cut off. Their question is, do you feel school meals should be free for all school-age children? They feel that this would not only ensure that every child is getting at least one hot meal, but would also reduce the stigma towards those individuals and families in food poverty, and of course taking that added pressure off the parents with these additional worries.
Short answer, yes, 100% agree with that. Primarily for the reasons they've just stated, and that reflects back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, a two-tier food system, and that ultimately a second-tier food system. There's always going to be an element of stigma involved with that, and it's the same with school meals as well. It should be universal for all children to be able to access free school meals. And the counter argument you often hear back from that, and even, you know, some high level politicians have recently said this as well, is that, well, if I earn a certain amount and I've got enough money, why shouldn't I, you know, pay for my child, you know, to have a school meal? And again, reverting back to what you said, there's a stigma element, but actually, if you have a fair taxation system that redistributes wealth fairly, then people with higher incomes, they are paying for it.
Yeah.
But it's through the taxation system.
Absolutely.
But at the point of use, you know, we Jimmy, whose parents are maybe on a lower income, you know, can access free school meals. We Emily, whose parents have a higher income, also access free school meals.
Yeah.
But they don't know what their parents, you know, are earning. There's no stigma involved because it's universal. Everyone has access to it. And I think that's why the question needs to be on fair taxation systems to ensure that we do reduce stigma at it and it's free at the point of need. And it takes so much pressure off families, like the person submitting that question's, you know, already summed up perfectly.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Thanks for that. That was a really great answer. Now I'd like to move on to some questions about the Trussell Trust itself and just some of the things that they've been doing. I'm aware, of course, that the Trussell Trust is calling for the end of food banks, and they believe that a big step in achieving this is raising the standard rate of universal credit to meet that of the recent rising cost of living and inflation. My question, though, would be, what about those families who attend food banks and individuals who attend food banks but are already in full-time work and don't actually claim universal credit at all? How do you think they might be supported?
Really important question again, because we are seeing, you know, a sizable number of people in employment that are accessing food banks. You know, whilst the majority are on social security, there is a sizable number. It's 1 in 6 in Scotland. People that come to a Trussell Trust food bank are in employment, and 13%, off the top of my head, somewhere around that, about 13%. Who are in full-time employment are food insecure in comparison to 21% who are in part-time employment who are food insecure. So it clearly paints a picture that work in of itself is not necessarily the answer to escaping food insecurity, to escaping poverty as well. And it's really important that we influence government and employers to deliver the changes needed in order to ensure that people that are in employment have access to fair wages and decent living hours. So we would certainly be calling on the governments at all levels to be taking action on this. And we would certainly like governments to fund the provision of flexible and personalised employment support programmes to really try and help overcome a lot of the barriers that people experience in terms of accessing work in the first place. There's a lot of issues in terms of maybe people with childcare responsibilities, or people with certain disabilities or health problems that need certain adjustments to be able to work, that these barriers are in the way at the moment. So we're really calling on government to fund the provision of flexible employment support programs to remove some of these barriers. But I think the question is more talking about not necessarily access to employment, but when you're in employment, people aren't generating enough income from their employment to be able to afford the essentials, which clearly isn't right. So again, we would certainly be calling on the UK government to bring forward legislation to increase rights to more secure work. I think that's one of the key things that we've been hearing, is that whilst workers may technically be getting paid, the real living wage, they're not actually provided with the real living hours. So they're not getting enough hours to be able to bring in the sufficient income that they need to be able to afford the essentials, food, heating, shelter, etc. So actually it would be calling on the UK government to enshrine some more rights and to protect people and to provide them with more stable employment, more secure employment as well. We would also, call for all levels of government to make better use of public procurement practices as well. That gives them an opportunity to promote fair work and open up, secure and decently paid paid jobs to different people, and particularly those, from groups that are underrepresented in employment as well. But also, it's really then, working alongside employers, working alongside government and trade union and trade or associations as well, to encourage employers to become real living wage employers, to be accredited as living hour employers as well. So ensuring people are paid enough in terms of a wage, but they're also given enough hours on top of that, and really encouraging employees to check that they're claiming everything that they're entitled to as well. Because just because someone's employment doesn't mean that they're not entitled to other means of support as well. So it's really just encouraging employees to make sure that they are aware of the support and advice that is available. Your Citizens Advice Network is your obvious go-to place for any form of support, and I would certainly encourage anyone, and I would encourage employers to encourage their employees, to reach out for support and help them in any way possible to check that they are claiming everything that they're entitled to. But so really it's about ensuring that that jobs secure, they pay well, and they provide enough hours for people as well. And this way, we can ensure that people have enough money to be able to afford what they need.
Yeah. Well, moving into our next question, to touch on that. Obviously, we mentioned earlier about the cash first approach, and the TP&I team have recently appointed our own cash first approach project worker. to get more involved in that work. But for those who maybe don't know what the cash first approach is, could you maybe tell us a little bit about it and why it might be better for those in food poverty compared to that of emergency food banks?
So in short, a cash first approach means prioritising money over anything else. So in an emergency situation, someone is provided with money, cash, income, as opposed to a food parcel or a food voucher or any other in-kind support, maybe like a fuel voucher. It's money, whether that's in the form of a bank transfer, whether that's in the form of, you know, a PIN code that you can take the money out of an ATM, whether that's physically cash in hand as well. Whatever means it is, it's money in the pockets of people that need it, and it's done so in a crisis situation. What the Scottish Government have included within their definition is that for this approach to be meaningful, it needs to be accompanied with access to more preventative-based services, so money, advice, and information, so that hopefully we can reduce the likelihood of the crisis reoccurring again in the future. So really, when we say cash first, we really mean cash and advice first.
Yeah.
But it's thinking about cash, money in the pocket as quick as we can to help people get through whatever their crisis may be, but thinking through how can we better support people move away from crisis support towards more preventative support that looks to build their income and their financial resilience longer term. So whether that's through, you know, a benefits checks to maximise their income, whether that's through employability support, whether that's through support with an application for adult disability payment, or support with energy efficiency measures, support with mental health, or whatever it might be. It's about ensuring that that is as easy as possible for a person in a crisis. We get the short-term crisis dealt with, and that's why a quick way of getting money into people's pockets, you know, as early as we can, but also thinking through how do we, you know, move beyond that, because we can't rely on crisis support at the level that we've been doing, you know, certainly from an emergency food provision, but also from, you know, a financial provision as well. The emphasis is trying to move away from crisis towards more preventative-based services. Why we believe cash first is better than emergency food provision. Firstly, we believe it gives people more control, choice, and agency over what they spend their money on. Generally, when someone is, this is the term that, you know, irritates me a little bit when people say food poverty, because it's very seldom that it's siloed to food alone. If someone's experiencing food poverty, they're probably experiencing fuel poverty. They're probably experiencing hygiene poverty. They're probably experiencing all sorts of poverty. So let's just call it what it is, poverty. And by calling it poverty, it actually brings the question back to income. So it brings the solution back to income. That's fun. It's not as easy as that, obviously. There are other factors that play clearly, but fundamentally, it's about income. It's about increasing people's income. So a cash first approach enables people to spend the money on whatever their crisis may be. So whether it's on food, maybe it's on school uniform, maybe it's on fuel, maybe it's on, you know, a boiler breakdown, maybe it's on funeral expenses. Thinking off the top of my head here, but it gives people choice, and it gives them control to spend it on what they need to spend it on. If they do need to spend it on food, it gives them control over where they spend it, what they spend it on, not a predetermined, you know, range of food that is provided at a food bank or a pantry or larder, which often relies on, you know, surplus food, which can be a bit patchy in terms of, you know, availability. And clearly the longer term goal is to reduce food waste, and actually we're, you know, beginning to see that in terms of the reduction that certainly supermarkets are are wasting, so there's actually less reliance on food waste for a lot of charities to be able to rely on. So yeah, giving money to people gives them the ability to factor in for dietary requirements, or maybe cultural requirements, or maybe if they need to buy halal meat, or maybe if they've got a child who's a fussy eater, which seems a trivial thing until you're actually in that situation when you have to feed a fussy child. It's not trivial when you're in that situation. But also then from more logistical points of view, it actually adds more value for money just to give cash directly to people as opposed to funding them through emergency food support or through a voucher scheme. Well, take the food bank network. It costs money to deliver that service. It's a time-consuming process to be able to collect donations, whether that's from the public or whether that's from businesses. It costs money to set up a warehouse. It costs money to transport food from place to place in order to get a food parcel to a distribution centre, or in order to deliver a food parcel to a person's home. It all costs money. But if you actually just gave that money directly,
so in hindsight, it's cutting out the middleman.
You'll actually get more bargain, more bang for your buck. Is that terrible turn of phrase? But because of all of the other costs incurred with, the food procurement, and the storage, transport, logistics, that all eats away at the support that could actually go to the person in need. So if we actually just went with a cash first approach, they're actually getting more or better value for money, because we're cutting out all of these, middle costs that, I'm not saying that they're not needed, because there is still a huge amount of need at the moment. So the need for food banks will remain. But I think the important thing about a cash first response is that food banks are posited as the last resort. So people coming to a food bank have accessed, emergency financial support. They've accessed support and advice, whether that's money advice or whether that's, support with anything else regarding, their health and well-being. But after all that support has been availed and that person is still in need, then of course, they can make a referral to the food bank, and they'll provide them with, emergency food to support them through that period of time. But ultimately, we want to guard against a food first response, and people just sending people to food banks because it appears to be the easiest or quickest option. The risk of that is that we're potentially missing out crucial opportunities to think of ways that we can better support people in crisis in the longer term as well. We've always said food banks are a sticking plaster, so we have to ensure that all opportunities are available for people to address the reasons why they're in financial hardship, and try and provide as much support as we can before coming to a food bank. It's not about making it more difficult to get support from a food bank. It's about ensuring people have better support and hopefully not having to go to a food bank at all. That's ultimately what we would like.
Well, I know the team are excited to have someone on board to get us more involved with this approach, and what work's going to come of it. I'm excited to see what happens as well. Just one more question for you, and that is, in light of wanting to end the need for food banks completely, do you think that we will ever see a completely food bank free Scotland?
Yes, I do. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't think that was possible. I'm really encouraged with what I'm seeing in terms of the way that food banks are supporting people in their communities locally. It's obviously been very frustrating with a lot of the structural level changes that we need to see in order for that to happen. But change needs to happen from the bottom up, but also from the top down as well. We need to see change in terms of better access to support services in local communities. better access to nutritious, affordable food in local communities. So we need to be focusing on community development. But clearly, there are structural matters at play, things like an inadequate social security net, things like employment that doesn't always pay as much as it should. That's why we need to work as a network, as a collective, to put pressure on these policymakers, because if we don't, if we keep quiet, they're not going to deliver the change we need.
Yeah.
But I'm convinced we will do it. It will take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen. We shouldn't have food banks at all, in the first place. We're, as I said earlier, the 6th richest nation in the world. There's plenty of income and there's plenty of food in the system to go around. It's a question of how do we redistribute this more fairly, more equitably. So yes, I do believe it will take time. We do believe that an essentials guarantee will make a big difference, and that is why that is our big campaign focus. Not our only one, as I say, we are campaigning on work-related calls as well, but the vast majority of people coming to food banks are those on social security, primarily those on universal credit as well.
Yeah.
And it's about 80, social security, 80% of people coming to food banks are coming in the UK, are on social security. They're relying on income from social security. And all we're calling for is that universal credit covers the basics, covers the essentials. I mean, I do sometimes scratch my head thinking, why are we even having this debate in 2024? That a social security system and the bare minimum should provide you with enough money to be able to feed yourself, to be able to heat your home, and to have a home in the first place. And then beyond that, that's a different question. But we're talking about the essentials here. And that's why we're calling on the essentials guarantee to bring into legislation a requirement that universal credit is calculated on a cost of living basis. So that because it's not at the moment, and when it is calculated on that, it's enshrined in law that payment cannot drop below that level. So our latest projections with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is that the basic rate should go from 85 to £120 per week in order for people to have enough money to afford their essentials. So if it was set at that minimum rate, you can't that figure can't come down anymore. So you can't take deductions from it to repay the hideous 5-week wait that and the advance system that people have to pay back to just be put onto the system in the first place. Sanctions can't come off of that. No deductions can come off of that, because that's the minimum amount you need to afford the essentials. So that's building up a lot of momentum. I think that will make a big change if we can see that enshrined in law, because that will take a lot of pressure off charities to be feeding people, and it's putting more responsibility on the government, because it's charities, as much of the great work that they've been doing, it should not be up to charities to pick up the pieces of a broken system. And one of the main reasons of this broken system is an inadequate social security system, which is not providing the safety net to people that are on it. So if we can see this change delivered, that'll make a big impact. But work doesn't stop there. We obviously need to continue working to ensure that other forms of social security are delivering, such as adult disability payment is one that's high on our radar at the moment as well. Also, the fair work, and in promoting real living wage, real living hours, as I've already touched on. There's a lot obviously to focus on, but this can happen because the wealth is there, the food is there. We just need to redistribute it more fairly. Yeah.
Well, I think that is all the questions that I have for you today, but I think you've done a really great job at showing, like, as I mentioned earlier, the compassion that the Trussell Trust show towards people in poverty in general. As you say, it shouldn't just be put down as food poverty. But yeah, I think this has been a really great interview. You've gave a lot of information and answers, and I think I can't wait to get the video out, honestly.
I would just like to conclude by saying that,
Yes.
this process, this journey that we're on, this is being driven by people with experience of poverty. We're just facilitating this process. Yeah. So borrowing a quote from the disability movement, nothing about us without us. We cannot change the systems without people with experience of poverty.
Yeah.
It has to be driven by people with experience of poverty, and we're really keen to ensure that we're listening at all stages, and really facilitating that process as well. So absolutely delighted to be involved in this interview. I think it's a wonderful idea. It's holding, it's asking questions, it's holding people to account. We're a charity, but we're accountable to, people who have experienced poverty, because we're there to, try and represent people with experience of poverty. So we are accountable. And that is why we not only want to hear from people with experience, we need to hear from people with experience of poverty, and we want more opportunities for this to happen. So yeah, delighted with this invitation, and just wanted to thank you for setting it up.
Well, thank you for your time today. It's really appreciated. And obviously lived experience is really important to us and our team as well. We have like the forum set up, so we have direct contact with some of the families that we work with all the time. And yeah, it is really important, I think, to get that lived experience out there, and having real people give their real stories to get these issues addressed. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with these interviews, is, like you said, hold people to account and get the right information out there. And yeah, I think I've definitely achieved that today with you. So yeah, thanks again for your time. It's really much appreciated. And to those watching, again, if you haven't seen our other videos, you can go check those out. I really hope you enjoyed the interview that we've done here today with Michael. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. And we will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone, and goodbye, Michael.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye.